on this computer. Okay, so I'm recording now. So I'll send the clinical observation one.
So thank you.
So today what I wanted to look at doing for you guys was more of a theory on sensory stuff. So I figured last time we did much more like basic introduction to clinical practice. We figured we'd do sensory stuff today. It'll be kind of linked in throughout, but then next week we can touch on more of the gross motor and fine motor. The reason I want to do sensory first is that that theory pertains to gross motor and fine motor development. So it's better to have an understanding of that before, right? And then we can touch on handwriting and more specific stuff. And I'm going to kind of weave self-regulation in throughout it because I think that it's, as much as it's a standalone topic, you need to understand the other areas to see how it affects self-regulation. Okay, because when you're planning your sessions, guys, you have to think basically what is the functional ability I'm working on and what is the regulation ability of the child that I'm working with. Those are the two things that will allow you to make your plans, right? If your kiddo, even if you have the best plan laid ever, if your kid is like completely disorganized and not regulated when they come in, you cannot do your plan until you get them regulated. That's your first goal, right? So your job as the therapist is to be the regulator, right? That's basically your role. You are the regulator of the child and they love you for it. Right? So one of the reasons kids really, really attach to their therapist, if it's a good match, is that we basically regulate them. We know what to say, how to say it, what to provide so that they feel organized when they're there. Feels good. Feels super good to be organized. So they love to come because they realize they feel good. Right? My favorite stories are when parents come and they're like, okay, this is going to sound really weird, but last night when we were putting them to bed, she was really, really concerned about what time you went to bed. I was like, yes. So we talked about my bedtime being later than her, but basically she was thinking about me at bedtime because she was trying to self-regulate. And so she was channeling her inner staff in an attempt to regulate herself. That's why I came up. Another kid, a parent was like, yeah, every time I said, let's go to the park, they were like, is Stephanie coming? Right? So they were talking about me when it was time to go to the park. But I don't normally go to the park with them. So what makes sense to me is that I basically provide that regulation for them. So when they need that access to the regulation, that's what they're thinking of me, right? And eventually we fade into the background because either the co-regulator is able to be the parent or they're able to regulate themselves in a much more independent fashion. They don't need us so much. That's the best part. Okay, so if you can correctly regulate your client, half the battle is won, even more than half the battle, because then you have full access to them. And sometimes if they're properly regulated, the skills come out, right? And so when you're thinking about regulation, you're going to obviously touch on all the sensory theory. So we mainly focus initially on vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile. Those are our big three that we start with. And then we touch a lot on the visual and the auditory systems. We don't do so much taste or olfaction, right? One of the fun facts about olfaction is actually you cannot directly affect it. So olfaction is strictly through cranial nerves. It does not go through the spinal column. So it is very fast. And that's a whole scientific thing, right? Your reptilian brain, where if you smell smoke, you get up and you move really fast. So smell is meant to be a safety feature and really quickly alert you to danger and get you to act. Okay, so I had a kid that I worked with, one of my first kids that I worked with when I moved back to Canada was, he was at the time 9, I think he was 9, and high functioning ASD diagnosis, wanted to be a chef, but he had the most incredibly sensitive sense of smell and taste, to the point where he would tell you if you had had bananas for breakfast after brushing your teeth. And he could tell you if something was going off in the fridge, and heaven forbid you open the garbage somewhere in his vicinity, right? Like that was terrible. And he used to gag and he would vomit, right? And so he was very limited in his eating. He was very anxious all the time because he was having these big reactions to stuff. And he had recipes. They were my 3 favorites. He's like, oh, I have a recipe for spicy shrimp, but I don't eat that, right? He'd always tell you, I have a recipe for that, but I don't eat that, right? And such an interesting kid. But he was so limited by the overpowering reaction he had to smell. And the only way that I did a bunch of research and I kind of looked up, different ideas and what we could do. And someone had given me those Sensi's candles. They'd given me the tester with all the different smells. And so I made games. I basically took the lids and took the bottoms and I would hide them. And I'd say, okay, we have to find one. We're going to smell it. And we have to match it to the other one. And we would close our eyes and so by giving him power, over the smell, the sense of smell, because we can't directly affect the sense of smell. But by giving him power, instead of overreacting to it immediately by making it something that he had to think about, so I added cognition, which can be very orienting for some of the kids that we work with. And he was a very cognitive thinker, right? By making it a game, by making it a challenge, by having him analyze it, because we did spices later on, we did food, we did a bunch of stuff. Right? He was able to then make it more of a game for him and a cognitive action instead of a reaction. And so he started to take control of it. And to the point where he came in one day and said, we used lemons today in art or in science, and I was okay. I didn't vomit, I didn't gag, right? And like, this is the highlight of his day. And so he's obviously always gonna have that sensitive smell, but as a chef, that could be a huge asset. So by helping him gain control of it, he was then able to be more regulated and use the sense with purpose, right? With function. So it's one of my favorite stories because it was such a cool reaction to it, but you can't really impact olfaction directly. You have it or you don't. Same with taste in a way, right? It's very strong, again, cranial nerve, so your responses are very immediate to it. Very rarely are you working on taste unless you're doing feeding, so we won't really go into that today. And it's very much linked to olfaction too, right? So it's complicated. My favorite sense is the vestibular sense, right? I'm slightly obsessed with it in a big way. I love it. It is fabulous. It is so interesting. It affects everything that we do, and it really impacts all the kids that get referred for occupational therapy. Do you guys need me to go over what all the senses are? Or are you guys pretty okay with that?
I just have a question. Do you ever talk about interoception as a sense?
Yep, that's number 8.
Okay.
It's new in the sense of research and even just discussion, right? It's much newer than the other ones. The predominant research is with children with autism, okay, because it's very clear that their interoceptive systems are not the same as ours, both from a emotional standpoint, so they don't feel regulation and emotion the same way, but they also often don't feel their bodies the same way, which is why elimination could be a problem, satiation and hunger, those kind of things. So interoception, for anybody who might not be sure of it, interoception is your inner signals. So hunger, full, having to go to the bathroom, having to have a bowel movement, being tired, being awake, all of those inner signals, right? So very much your vagus nerve, all that kind of stuff is interoception, as well as how you feel, your emotions. So if you don't feel big happiness, it's very hard for you to recognize it in someone else, or to recognize when you do feel happy or sad or mad or any of that stuff, right? It's kind of like they have an internal bubble that blocks all of this stuff. So those are your kids who hold going to the bathroom until the last possible minute, to the point where they wet. But it's not that they can't feel it in the end, it's just they need their bladder to be so full that now they finally feel it, but it's almost too full, they can't hold it anymore, right? You have kids who will overeat. You have kids who will never feel hungry, right? Which is a big problem for feeding. So they kind of snack throughout the day, but if you don't have those hunger signals, it's very hard for you to recognize when you're going to eat a meal or when you've had too much. And that can be really, really hard for function, right? So interoception is an area. I have a really cool book, and I'm trying to remember the author of the book, and I cannot right now. So someone will remind me, and I will send it to you guys, because she's one of the leading people who has done a lot of research in interoception. She wrote a book about it. She talks a lot about children on the spectrum, but some of the kids that we see that have sensory issues just have sensory issues. They don't necessarily have to be on the spectrum. So that's another thing, actually, before we get into the individual senses. People will come in and say, hey, I have an SPD diagnosis, right? Sensory processing disorder. I think we talked a little bit about this last time. It's not a standalone diagnosis. A lot of kids will be on the spectrum and have sensory issues. A lot of families come in and they talk about sensory issues and they've Googled it and they're freaking out because they think their kid is on the spectrum. It is not the case that you have to be on the spectrum in order to have sensory issues, right? And it isn't an issue until it impacts function. Those are the most important things to remember about sensory. So usually by the time they're coming to us, something is really bothering them, right? So one of the intake calls I did this week, the mom was calling for a 3-year-old who, mom was like, I didn't really think there was a problem. And then the other day I gave her a t-shirt to put on, just like I gave to her brother, and she freaked out. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, it's my fault. I forgot to give you a long sleeve shirt. And then she's like, oh, wait a minute. We shouldn't have that reaction for me forgetting to give you a long sleeve shirt. I've been compensating for you the whole time, right? And it really got her going. And then she started thinking of all the other things. And she was like, So she called. And it was a great conversation because I was like, wow, you just picked up on it all on your own. And, you know, the kid doesn't like to wear socks. And there's a lot of indicators that there are tactile things going on. But it always starts with function, right? When it impedes function, that's when it becomes a problem. So you have interoception. Oh, yeah, go.
Is the difference between interoception and proprioception is that proprioception is more towards your muscles, your active muscles, versus interoception is more your smooth muscles?
Yeah, well, it's your inner muscles, right? So for interoception, it's not even necessarily muscles, it's also organs. Whereas your proprioception is very much joints and muscle force, right? So the grading of force is your proprioceptive sense. So when you think about the grading of force, one of the ways I often think of it is if you're going to open a door, right? And you think it's a very heavy door. So you go to pull the door, and when you pull it, it slams and almost hits you in the face, right? We've all done it.
Yeah.
So that is how you had that feed forward system. So you had your anticipatory postural control was there in order, you're ready, you think it's going to be heavy, you've got everything primed to do it. And when you pull, it's too much. It's like when kids are learning to drink, right? And they take their cup and they go, oops, oh my God, I got my face. And oops, oh, I missed again. And eventually you get to the point where you can use one hand, you bring it to your mouth and you can read, I used to say read the newspaper, but now everyone's on their tablet at the same time, right? And you very rarely miss. You're not paying attention to it because you've created a motor pattern versus motor planning for an action. So proprioception is one of the drivers to motor planning because you have to learn about how your body's going to do it. The other good example of muscle force, one that we see a lot in kids, is that they hug too hard, right? So the family's like, yeah, we can't always hug them, but man, they hurt other kids when they hug them. Or the over tagger, that's one of my personal favorites, right? They're playing tag and they really didn't mean to shove the kid into the wall, but they did. And the kid started crying and they're like, but why does everybody not want to play with me? Right? Or the kid goes to put the block on top of the tower and smashes it down. A lot of those kids didn't mean to smash. They thought they were just placing it, but their body understanding, their proprioceptive understanding of joint position, right? So what their position of their joint needs to be in order to achieve that action, and how much force, muscle force to use, plus or minus, is poor. So they often use too much, right? They hurt animals when they hold them. They don't understand, or they have not enough understanding in order to use too little. That's the kid that has the really loose grip, right, on the pencil, very, very light writing. They probably think they're pushing down a lot more, but they're not. So that's the difference. So your interoception is more what you would feel inside from different organs, and feelings are really hard because like, what organ does that really come from? I guess it's more your brain and your heart, but it's harder to analyze that one. It was a good question. But most of this, like the interoceptive systems, it's your internal organs that tell you. So we covered a bit proprioception, right? That's a really important one for the development of motor planning, coordination, and any kind of motor action. If you're going to think of it from a okay, that's where we have to go. Sorry, I'm going to reorganize. One day I'm going to watch all of these and I'm going to organize my thoughts and make it like really succinct. Okay, one day when I have time. So before I can really get into the sensory stuff, you need to understand the difference between sensory motor processing and sensory modulation. So there's two different things when you think about sensory. It's kind of like the yin and the yang. You can't have one without the other, but you can have difficulties in one area without affecting the other, or you can have difficulties in both. So your sensory motor processing, right? And a lot of people say sensory processing, but I've started saying sensory motor processing to make it easier for newer therapists to understand the difference. Right? So sensory motor processing is how you process sensory information coming into your body in order to have a motor output. So in order to have balance, you need to understand gravity, right? That's your vestibular system. You need to understand how to shift your weight from one side to the other and stabilize that foot. That's your proprioceptive system, right? You need to use your eyes initially anyway, right? I think it's before the age of 8, you are mostly visual. So your visual system guides balance versus your vestibular. So your visual system is going to fix on a point and help you keep your balance. All of that sensory input is coming into your body. You're processing it quickly or slowly, depending on what kind of a processor you are. And that will allow you to then have a motor output. Okay? Pretty clear?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you have sensory modulation. Sensory modulation is your ability to either be an under responder or an over responder or a just right responder to sensory input, right? So it's how we regulate our body in response to the input coming in. A good example would be tactile defensiveness, right? We are an over responder, hyper responsive as well, to tactile input coming in. Somebody who needs to eat spicy food all the time is someone who is under responsive to taste. Same the kids who overstuff their mouths, right? They often have very poor oral tactile modulation, or that's processing and modulation combined, right? But when you think about the modulation piece, it's really how it affects behavior and organization. So if you want to calm someone down, if you want to organize them, you're going to use sensory modulation, right? So that's our ability to take it in and have a behavioral response to it versus a motor response, I guess is the clearest way to put it. How clear is that? All right. When you're evaluating a kid, you're going to look at both. And by looking at both, you're then going to see, and sometimes it's tricky, right? Because I had a kiddo come in, and this is a mom who's studying psychology, super on the ball, knows a lot about autism, right? Like really, really knowledgeable. And she came and she's like, he is having so many sensory issues. He's just losing his mind on all the sensory stuff. And I started doing the evaluation. And by the third time he'd thrown the scissors, I was like, you know what? Every response I get from him that looks disorganized is actually a response to a motor demand. He wasn't sensitive to any sensory systems. He didn't seem to be seeking any sensory input. Every response I got that was a negative, poor regulation response was based on a motor demand that I put forward, right? It took me actually 4 hours over several sessions to complete the bot with him. And he's a really good kid, neurotypical, right? Except he has DCD now, right? We have a DCD diagnosis. And there's possibly some attention stuff going on. But once we started getting his motor stuff going, his regulation improved huge leaps and bounds of improvement. And so when initially you think it might be a modulation issue, right? So leading you to self-regulation and behavioral stuff, you still have to analyze often both sides because it can be hidden. So if there are motor issues, it can cause us to be dysregulated because we can't complete the things we're trying to do. So then we have a bigger response to sensory input than we normally would if we were well organized. Okay, and that is going to take you probably a full year to feel really comfortable with. Right? I remember when I was practicing, and I wasn't doing full-time initially peds at first, but I remember the day it kind of clicked and I was like, oh, right. There are two different things I'm looking at. I cannot just consider one or the other. There are two completely different things. Vestibular affects balance, bilateral coordination, ocular motor skills. It affects your core strength. It's huge, right? Even upper limb coordination. Everything comes down to vestibular. But your vestibular also affects your arousal level. So your energy level, right? If you sit for too long, I've been out of school for a really long time. I cannot sit anymore. I fall asleep. I fall asleep halfway through movies, TV shows, all the time. It takes us like weeks to finish a movie because my eyes get really heavy and I fall asleep. It's the same when I do continuing education. I cannot sit for long periods of time. My energy level goes tanking. And so as soon as I get up and start moving around though, I wake up and my energy level, my arousal level increases and I'm at a better place for all the activities I have to do. So that's why so many of us take bathroom breaks, or I'm going to get water breaks, or I'm going to go get a tea or a coffee while we're sitting and working at our desks and working on computers. At one point, our arousal level goes down and we need movement. It's actually a vestibular thing that we do.
Can you discuss, you were saying that vestibular affects bilateral coordination, posture. Can you discuss some of those links?
Yep. So, but in that point though, I just wanted you guys to understand that it affects both, right? So it's both the motor part, but it also affects your arousal level. And so you can't consider one without the other. Okay, so let's talk strictly vestibular right now, right? My favorite. So vestibular is, I believe it's at 8 weeks gestation that it is ready to go in a baby's inner ear, right? So it is functioning, not fully mature, but mature enough to be receiving information and messages and starting the process of, we call it developmental flexion, right? So you'll learn about it as you're going into it more. But as the baby grows in utero, we eventually get to the point where the baby is too big for the uterus. So that's when they have that nice flex position all in like that, right? It's called developmental flexion. It's very important. It's one of the reasons that we're more concerned about preemies. Even children born before 36 weeks would be considered still enough preemie that they didn't develop all of the proprioceptive and vestibular information in utero because they didn't have that really tight space to move against, right? Again, now having been pregnant, I understand that they push and they're at a space. Like you see, I kid you not, you see a hand or foot sticking out. Like it rolls across. It is crazy how much they move in there, but they need all that input because that's basically priming their muscles, right? So they're feeling how they can move against it, all from a flexed position. So developmental flexion is actually all your back muscles, right? You think it's prone extension, but it's developmental flexion at first. Super fascinating, guys.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Right? Like it's so interesting. So my little guy right now, when I put him flat, okay, because I do tummy time every day, many, many times a day, and he's flat, and now he's pushing up, right? But that is actually developmental flexion that he's working on. You think it's prone extension, it's not prone extension. Okay? And that's higher level too, and we will get there. But just for you to understand how ingrained vestibular is in everything that we are going to see from the moment we are in utero, not even born yet, right? But when you think of a baby, they're born, right? They come out of this water world and they're flat. They're not fully flat. Their legs are very up because they're in that flex position, but eventually they become flat against gravity. Gravity always wins. You and I, we don't think about gravity because we're used to it. We haven't grown in a very long time. But everything that we learn motor-wise initially is our body's response to gravity. How can we get our hands to midline up against gravity? How do we hold our head against gravity? That's always trying to pull it, right? How do we then get our bodies in a seated position against gravity? How do we push ourselves up against gravity? How do we get our legs up so we can play with our feet? It's all against gravity. That's how we develop muscle, anything, right? You don't have any postural control unless you have gravity. So if you were born on Mars, we'd have other issues, right?
Internet is really broken.
My internet?
Sorry.
Okay.
My internet. I was telling my brother that I wanted him to go fix it.
Oh, there you go. I was like, no, I just reset it. And no joke, on Saturday, we got a new internet box. Okay. Because we were having this issue.
Sorry.
Did you say
I made tea and it's hot. This is very exciting for me. Hot. It's a hot beverage. And it's not in a to-go container with a lid.
It's in a Star Wars cup.
Oh yeah, sorry. I like Star Wars. This is my Darth Vader cup. I'm a geek. I also am obsessed with Harry Potter. I get along very well with a lot of the kids. Yeah, oh no. I was one of the people, okay, because y'all are a bit younger than me, when the books were coming out 4, 5, 6, and 7, and it was released at midnight. I don't know if you guys know about this, right? Because you were a bit younger than me, but it was released at midnight.
I think we are. I remember this.
I'm 36. I'm significantly older. And
I remember that.
Well, so does my sister, and she's 30, because I took her to all the releases. I was like, Mom, I'm taking Laura, right? Except it was my excuse to go, and we ordered 2 copies of every book, and we went with our friends, and anyway, we were like a crew that went, and we waited for that release for all 4 of those books, and then we stayed up all night reading it. It was really awesome. So
remember that? Yeah. This is my current USB.
Oh my God. We're going to get along fine.
Right, sorry.
That's okay. We will get back to focus. I'm really tired because I have 2 sick babies. What was I talking about? I was talking about vestibular, but what about vestibular?
Tummy
Utero,
time, flexion.
Right. Okay. So when you think about how it proceeds and how everything goes against gravity, okay, when you link it to the vestibular system is how you're basically thinking, hold on, I have to organize my thoughts so I explain it clearly, right? I think it's almost easier for you to understand how it affects the vestibular by thinking about what it is. So balance, right? When you think about balance, and this is the only useful thing that we learned in our master's degree, right, was basically task analysis. So when you think about any task you're trying to do, being able to break it down to what do you need to accomplish that task is like the basic life skill you need for OT. You don't need anything else. If you can do that and apply it to a fun game, you can do PEDS. And so balance involves your vestibular system, involves your understanding of gravity, right? By association, it involves postural control. So your postural stability, postural control is the number one thing we develop at first. And it is vestibular and proprioceptive coming together. I have an idea. I'm going to show you guys a table. I think this will help it make more sense. You guys got all the handouts I sent you by email?
Yes. Yeah, got everything.
Okay, so let me pull this up. So sensory information, I just have to find it in all of my 8 million files. Side visuals. Okay, I think this is the one I want to show you. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to do a screen share and we'll see if it will show. Alexia is just listening in. So Alexia, I don't know if I've shown you this one. It's the one with, it's from the Jean Ayres book. So you've probably seen it and we can talk about it another time if you want while you're looking at it. Can you guys all see this, the table?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So this is from the Jean Ayres book. I think it is a great way to explain it from a more high level. You know, the house explains it really nice for parents and for those of us as we're learning at the beginning and how to explain it. But this explains how they integrate at the different levels. So your first level, your senses, right? So they talk about auditory, vestibular, proprioceptive, tactile, and visual. Okay. Now the first, your tactile, right, is very important at the first level. Okay. So your first level is just the basics. Your second level is what you're doing right away, what you're developing, all of your learning at the baby level, right? So this is where my kid's working right now. Okay, he's chilling out in the sucking and eating. So right away, those are the first things that we need to be able to do to survive, right? Super important. The mother-infant bond, touch, comfort. So I actually have a whole book on touch that I have bought with the intent to read at some point, but doing massage, right? So just by literally massaging my baby, I'm affecting his development. So every time I change his diaper, we do a little body massage. And I'm hoping to improve his tactile understanding and also, in a way, his proprioceptive understanding of his body because I'm getting to the muscles too. So your tactile system, the touch, the ability of the baby to touch and feel, right? All of that is super, super important. And it's the second level. It's very basic. The vestibular system is the next one that you see that is working in the second level in the immediacy, right? Eye movements. So when a baby is first born, they have nystagmus, right? The eyes move. Very, very normal. If it persists, then it becomes an issue, right? That's when parents are concerned. But it is very normal to have that as a newborn. And I'm trying to remember exactly when it went away, and I can't really, I have to like think about that, but I was very tired when it all happened. But it's within the first, few weeks. It doesn't last long. And then you start to see that they can see you. And then they start to be able to track. And so visual, again, seeing isn't engaged until the 4th level, right, guys? Like it doesn't get there till the 4th or 5th level. But your eye movements is a totally different ballgame. So ocular motor skills are vestibular based. Oh, hold on. Alexia wants to get back in. I know I can do this without deleting you guys. Hey, success. Hi, Alexia. I did it.
So essentially, all like first level is a prerequisite to the second is prerequisite to the third is a prerequisite to the fourth.
Exactly. You have to have the things that come in the first levels to efficiently and yeah, I guess efficient is the best, not correct, but efficiently use all the other skills going forward. Otherwise, they're not going to fully develop. There'll be problems, or you won't develop it, and then we notice it. So we'll talk about it from this way, and then we'll talk about it from the house way, so that I can tell you how I've explained it, right, with the house one. But your eye movements is the ocular motor skills. So your eye tracking, your saccades, which is your ability to look from one side to the other, right, like this, with just your eyes moving, not head movement, right? So you've got tracking, you have the ability to converge. So if I look at my one point and I bring my finger to my nose, right, my eyes come into the middle and then they come back out. So convergence and divergence, really important. A lot of times you'll see when you try to do convergence, the eyes come in and then they pop back out, right? That's an issue. Sometimes you see that binocular vision, the eyes do different things. Sometimes you see that as you're tracking, there's like a squiggle of the eyes at midline. It's almost like a reset to follow to the rest of the place. Sometimes they can't do it all and they're rubbing their eyes and they really can't do it. So ocular motor skills are initially a vestibular thing. Okay, it's a muscle thing. It has nothing to do with the eyes itself. It's the muscles around the eyes that work. And if you go from a higher level thing, there's a lot of nerve functions that connect with the vestibular system before they go into the brain. It's really interesting. You've got posture, balance, muscle tone, and gravitational security. So those are the most basic vestibular skills you develop. And if you think about it, our ability to stand up and walk at 12 months-ish, right, sometime between 12 and 18 months, is based on all of those things. So it is a vestibular skill. And when they talk about muscle tone, a lot of people will initially think proprioceptive. However, it is linked more with vestibular. Tone itself is linked with vestibular, right? Your muscle strength and the coordination of muscle is proprioceptive. Those two separate things. So this is why when you think about sensory integration, it's more complex, but it actually applies to more things than just the modulation piece, which is what they kind of talk about initially at school, or what people initially think of when you speak of sensory integration. Then you look at the third level. The third level, now we're tying in vestibular, proprioceptive, tactile, right? Those three big ones that I talked about. So those are the ones that are going to now work on our body percept, right? Body awareness. So you've got kids who are super stumbly at first, and then they develop this really nice habit of running and not running over things. Or if they hit something, they're able to regain their balance before falling, right? Their body understanding is much better. And it's really cool. It happens quite quick, right? My 21-month-old, he's really aware of what his body can do in space. It's fascinating to watch. He can climb. He knows how much force to use. He knows when he can't get off something, right? He's now playing with the 2-foot jump. I went for a walk today and he would see cracks and he would point at it, right? And then he would go and jump over it. How cool is that? It blows my mind every day, guys. I never showed him this. He just wanted to. And now I show him, but he did it first. It's so interesting. Bilateral coordination. So that's a third level skill. Bilateral coordination requires you to have a body understanding. If you do not understand the ability to use right and left together, now bilateral coordination is also upper and lower. Okay, so when you think of bilateral coordination, you're thinking of any of the midlines that you have. You have this midline, right, down the center of your body, dividing right and left. You have your midline at the core, dividing upper and lower. And then you have the sagittal plane, right, on the side, dividing front and back. We don't really do much with front and back. Doesn't really affect function all that much. But upper and lower, so the kids who can't do jumping jacks, right? So their arms are moving, but the legs are doing nothing. It's just jumping up and down. Or the right and left. So bilateral coordination requires vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile understanding, right? They have to understand touch as well. Then you think about motor planning, right? So motor planning is only a third level skill. How cool is that? It's the most complex thing we do. But you can't get to any of those end results if you don't have the motor planning piece. It doesn't work. Your body doesn't make sense to you. Attention span, kind of cool that it's in there, right? And activity level. So anybody who's telling you that your 3-year-old is really, really, really hyper, right? There is typical energy 3-year-old, but there's also the 3-year-old who doesn't have a good understanding of their body, who doesn't have good motor planning, right? They have too high an activity level and they actually have very poor attention. So we're working in the third level. We haven't even made it to cognition yet. Forget accessing cognition. It's not there. That's not what they're responding to. And emotional stability.
Fourth level is cognition.
Yeah, fourth level and into fifth, right? The fifth level, that final one, the end products, is all of the brain. That's all the brain stuff. But if you think about emotional stability, that they put in the third level, which I think is super interesting. Everything in the third level there is a toddler. All of those things are the things that drive you crazy about a toddler, right? Emotional stability. I took the calculator away from Max, meltdown. He knows it's not going to go anywhere. He knows he gets it back all the time, right? He wants the water. He drinks the water. He spits the water. He loses the water. Meltdown. So, emotional stability. All of those things will impact your emotional stability, okay? Then you move on to the fourth level. Hey, check it out. Auditory is involved now. Speech and language, right? So we're still toddler, guys. This is all stuff that we are initially learning at the toddler phase, right? Good language development. We look at a 3-year-old, 4-year-old to have nice, efficient, modern, no, that's not the word I'm looking for. Mature use of language. And only after do we develop the end products: concentration, self-regulation, self-esteem, self-control, confidence, academic learning, hey, cognition, right? Abstract thoughts, reasoning, brain lateralization. Those things are later. And for boys, executive functioning goes until 21. Okay? They are not mature in executive functioning until about 21. It's real. Science has shown it.
Wait, are we talking about 21 months or 21 years?
Oh no, 21 years.
Oh, also
21 years, exactly. If we go back to that fourth level, you've got eye-hand coordination, visual, percept, and purposeful actions. So everything that we look at can pretty much be pinpointed to where we might be having a deficit, right? So if we're having ADHD is a prime example. So many kids get diagnosed with ADHD, they come to us for treatment, and you're like, what do I do with you? We don't do medication for us, right? If you think about all the areas of difficulty, concentration, organization, self-esteem is huge. There's no self-control, right? No delayed gratification. All of those executive functioning skills are there. But often there's holes in the rest of the plan, right? And if you think about it from the house perspective, do you guys remember the house? Do you want me to pull it up? I can pull it up.
We didn't talk about it last time. It was
I sent it out. Okay, so this is one of the things. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to pull out my SI house. Okay, so now I go back to sharing this one. All right, so here is my house. You guys see the house okay?
Yep.
All right, I really like this. This is great for parents for understanding. When you think about the house, you're gonna say the bottom foundation of my house is the sensory system development. You also have reflexes in there, okay? That's another topic. But sensory systems are all in the foundation of your house. Then if you think about the first floor of your house, right, you've got your sensory motor development, body scheme, motor planning, I don't know why it says screening, but I guess this postural security makes sense, awareness of the two sides of the body, reflex maturation, right? So the reflexes are now maturing. Then you go to the second floor of your house, which is your perceptual motor development. So there's your auditory language skills, visual spatial perception, attention, eye-hand coordination, ocular motor control, postural adjustments. Those are your fine and gross motor skills, your coordination. Okay? And then your roof is your cognition and your intellectual development. So academics, daily living activities, behavior, executive functioning is in there, right? Self-regulation is in there, social skills are in there. The school really only cares about the roof, right? And psychologists, they work in the roof. They know the rest of it exists because they'll refer to us, but they evaluate the roof. We evaluate the rest of the house. And so when they're having difficulty with the roof, my question is always, well, what else is going on in the house? Because if you have cracks in the foundation, your house is built, but it's leaning, it's crooked, right? You can still have a house, it's just not super stable. But if you shore up the foundation, often then you're able to straighten out the house, right? Think Leaning Tower of Pisa, okay? It's problems. And so for us, whenever someone comes to us and their concern is somewhere in this house, we have to look at the floors underneath it to be like, okay, where are things not working so that I can then address the issue, right? You can work on handwriting as an example without ever touching a pencil. Parents don't believe it at first. And then they're like, the handwriting's getting really good. I'm like, haven't touched a pencil yet, guys. Haven't even done it. Not once. And they're like, what? I'm like, yes. Because you don't necessarily have to have a pencil. You have to address the underlying difficulties, right? The reasons that they are not picking it up on their own, because they should have just picked it up on their own. That's what school does. They practice all of these things. So if they're not picking it up on their own, something is blocking that ability to imitate and learn from peers or from parents, right? Or from the educators around them. So this is what helps you to analyze it. This and the other table will help you place your thought process. Right? Does that make sense? I find that that is probably the most useful way of looking at it and understanding how they impact. Okay, so this is the house, which explains the levels. And then I'll go back to my other table. Nope, stop share. Hold on, sharing is paused. Other table. Okay, and so when you're talking about vestibular, if you look back here, it'll always help you remember what it affects, right? Eye movements, those ocular motor, posture, balance, muscle tone, gravitational security. Gravitational security is another topic. We will touch on it, but it's a bigger topic. How do I want to explain that? So when you're thinking vestibular, we'll stick to that for right now. You've got your vestibular motor processing, which is the posture, the balance, the ocular motor skills, the bilateral coordination, because again, that's vestibular, proprioception, and tactile, right? So which area isn't working as it should in order to have poor bilateral coordination, right? That's how I analyze it. And I always think, okay, well, is it, just proprioception? Is it just vestibular? Or is it a little bit of both? And you'll get clues, right? As you start to observe more children and see where the patterns are, it really will become clear to you, right? But having the foundational theory helps you to then understand it. Gravitational security is our ability to feel comfortable in gravity. Gravitational insecurity is basically how those kids who feel gravity too much. Right? So if you and I were to climb to the top of a jungle gym and look down, right, it might be a little bit scary, but we know that we're secure on the footing that we're on, right, on our platform, and that we know we can climb down. A kid with gravitational insecurity would never have climbed that high in the first place. They do not like to have their feet off the ground, point final, right? They don't like to be picked up. They don't, maybe their parents can pick them up, right? Because there's a huge trust thing there, but they don't like to be picked up. They don't like to climb things. Climbing walls, like sometimes it takes effort to get them to touch the climbing wall. Forget climb the climbing wall, just to approach it and engage with the climbing wall. A zip line, they look at it, they're like, that looks like so much fun. Are you crazy? I'm never doing that, right? And step by step by step. So gravitational insecurity, it's very real. I've treated kids with it, and they're so hesitant to try anything. That's the kid that's standing back at the playground, right? They're the one who's standing back at recess, the one who avoids everything. So sometimes the parents don't even really realize until they start doing sports, or they're at school and the teacher is like, well, they don't like going down the stairs, and they don't like doing this, and they don't engage with the other kids. And you have to really start to analyze why. What is the limiting factor? Some kids, you know right away, because they are screaming and crying when they're at the top of the stairs, right? That's a huge functional deficit. It's so hard for them to function in daily life. When you think of, and gravitational security is not, like, yes, it is the motor sensory processing, right? It's our ability to process the vestibular information correctly, the gravitational information, but we are responding too much to it. So it is a over response to vestibular input. The same information is coming into my body that's going into yours. Gravity is the same for everybody, but my body responds more to it than yours does. Is the best way to think about it, right? It's an over response. You can also have an over response to vestibular movement. Okay, so gravity doesn't require movement. You just stand there and you feel it and you feel insecure. Then you're going to have the over responders who respond to movement. So they're fine if they're in control and doing something, but they're going to get sick in the car. They're going to avoid any kind of ride. They're not going to like swings. They're not going to like going down the slide, right? It's when you pair movement into it that you're going to see it. So that is an over responsiveness to vestibular input through movement. Just to make things a little bit trickier when you're analyzing, some kids will look like they're over responsive to movement because they avoid swings, they avoid slides, they avoid tobogganing, right? They avoid going in a wagon when you pull them because they always fall backwards, right? Every time that there's a force acting on them. It could also be postural instability. Okay, so when you're looking at a refusal to participate in certain activities that are vestibular, you have to consider gravitational security. You have to consider a movement intolerance, right? That over responsiveness to movement. And you have to consider a postural stability. Because if we have no postural stability, we aren't able to do those activities. And we have learned through practice that it hurts to fall. It really sucks if we fall off of the swing every time we're on it and it goes too fast. That every time we go on the toboggan, we fall off because my body does not have enough postural stability to stay upright against the movement. That is a muscular vestibular thing, right? So that's sensory motor processing.
But do you sometimes, or does it happen regularly that you get like both gravitational insecurity and postural? Because I assume that if you're so insecure, you're not trying to put yourself, like you're avoiding hard because you're going to end up with maybe like somewhat postural, or at least adapting posture to movement.
That's exactly right. So by not participating in typical play activities that children do, you then lack the practice. So your postural stability doesn't develop at the same speed or the same efficiency, which also then affects your bilateral coordination, body percept, motor plan, attention span, right? It affects all the other levels. Yeah. So you hit it exactly right. It probably started as a gravitational security and then it developed into a postural instability because of the lack of practice. All of these things that kids do, the play that they're doing, the need to move is learning. That is how they learn. It is their biggest job. And so our therapy looks like play to somebody who's looking at it from the outside. They're like, what are they actually doing? You're paying someone to play with your kid, right? But we're playing in a very informed way. We get it, right? Today I let my kid, we went for a walk and I let my kid dig in the gravel, full on digging in the gravel, right? He ate some. I tried to avoid that, but I let him dig in it. And then he walked over to a puddle. And I was like, ooh, this is exciting. It's going to be dirty and dad's not going to like it, but I'm into it. It's cool. And I'm carrying the baby at the same time, right? And so I'm like, I can't stop you anyway, so go. And so he walks up to it and he's looking down at this puddle, right? And he just opens his hands like this. And some of the rocks fall. Not all of them because they're stuck to his hands, but they fall and they create little splashes. And he's looking, he's like, ooh, right? And then he claps to congratulate himself and more of them fall. So he's like, whoa, that just created way more puddles, right? And so he went and did it again. And he's like, more, and looks for more things. But he was in the middle of so much cool learning. You can't create that, right? I can't teach him that. I got to step back and be like, just let him get dirty and hopefully not eat too many rocks. And so he totally did that like 5-6 times. Then he was like, see me, right? And walked over. And I was like, he got what he needed out of it. And that was therapy. That right there was therapy, right? So it often happens on its own. And Alexia is probably nodding to herself in the car right now because that is what we're doing in Nature Club.
I'm at home now.
Okay.
And I was literally just like, nature club.
Right? That is the whole point. Like they just do this stuff and all you have to do is step back and you're like, they are doing therapy all by themselves. I just created the perfect environment, right? I created the opportunity. That is what we do, right? We are facilitators. We create the opportunity for them to do this stuff. They have to do it. If we move their body for them, they are not learning anything new. It's not useful. Okay? That was like, that's the basic theory, I think, that if you get that, you can figure everything else out. And so when we're thinking about all the sensory stuff, right, we're going to think about function. So first, what is the issue? What are we having difficulty with? Why are you being referred to us? Sometimes it's handwriting, and then we realize there's all sorts of other issues. Okay, so but you start always with that reason for referral, and then you go to the theory in your head and be like, okay, well, what are the possible reasons you're having trouble with this? That's what I'm going to evaluate. Like, yeah, I'm going to have you do some handwriting, but I also need to check your postural stability. I need to check your bilateral coordination. I need to check your eyes, your ocular motor skills. Like there's all these things you have to check, right? Visual motor integration. So the ability to take in visual input and then have a motor response to that visual input, which is our ability to copy anything, right? So those kids who painstakingly copy things, they can't, but they can draw beautiful things from memory. Super. Ariella, do you have a question? Yeah, well, it just came on.
I blowed my nose and I didn't unmute it.
I knew it.
That's awesome. It's okay. We're mooshing a lot over here. Both the kids have colds. It's awesome. Good news, not COVID. Yay.
Oh, you got it.
We didn't go
Glad
for
to
the
hear.
test, but the whole daycare, all 6 of the kids at daycare are sick. And so like on Sunday morning, my kid wakes up with a perpetual runny nose. Like it's literally just leaking, right? It's clear, just a fountain. And I'm like, oh goody, this is the start of an excellent fall. And middle of breakfast, the educator texts me, how's Max feeling? I was like, funny you should ask. And so the other kids had like the same thing. Some of them had vomited. Like it was a whole big thing.
Oh.
No, mine just had a runny nose and occasional because the phlegm went down his throat, right? So I was like, you're fine. But the other kid went for a test and it came back negative. So I was like, good, I'm not taking you for a test. She didn't require it because they all have the same cold. Exactly. They all got sick the same day. So we're good. She sent me a picture, or sent all the parents a picture. All the kids had popsicles. It's a home daycare with 6 kids. They all had popsicles and they were all cheersing. I was like,
Oh, it's so cute.
that's where the cold started. One of those.
Not COVID safe, but cute.
You can't COVID safe a 20-month-old. There's no way.
That's
Don't touch that.
true.
Forget it. So
Yeah.
it is what it is. And
That's what they told daycares. They're like, just keep the kids 2 meters away from each other and playing with one toy all day.
yeah, and then
My
they
mom's
realized
like,
that it was impossible, so it doesn't
Have
happen.
you-
There's no rules.
Have you
that
met
they can-
children?
Yeah,
No.
it's not going to happen. It's going to create big problems. I don't want my kid to be afraid of others or afraid to do something.
That's
I'm always going, right? Like, no, just know I will create anxiety. So I've just let it go. My kid ran into the middle of the road today and I don't freak out. I go, come back over here. We don't, No, the other day, what did he do? Oh, he picked up a knife. That was a good one. Off the table, he can eat everything, right? And Daniel is eating. This is great. Somebody is sitting across the thing, and Max is in his high chair, and he's holding the knife, and I'm walking with the baby. So I turn around because I've been walking the other direction, and I'm like, oh, Daddy, get the knife away from Max, because Max is doing this.
Oh God.
Puts the knife right into his mouth. And I'm like, oh, that's good. That's awesome. But if I'd had a big, huge, oh my God, like he probably would have stabbed himself. So I was really
Oh,
chill,
God.
calm about it. And we got the knife away. And
Is
But
that a learned skill? Because I really don't think I have it. That chill thing about when I see a kid with a knife.
Yeah, I don't think I could do
That
that.
learned.
no, you'll be surprised at what you can be. Like, you're going to always respond with your gut, right? But that response will be tempered, because at one point you're just going to be like, if I panic, they panic. And so you're going to learn so well to respond only the way you want them to respond, because they are going to match to you. And that's the whole self-regulation part, right? So that's that modulation, self-regulation. And so we went off topic again. God, so bad. And it's already 8 o'clock, but I think I covered like a really main lesson today, actually.
Yeah.
The ability to look back at each of the systems and where it comes in, right? In that sensory motor development is going to then allow you to figure out what you need to check beforehand. And it all comes back down to that foundation piece of the senses, right? That's why it makes sense. So even if you're doing co-op, right, using strictly cognitive top-down approach to learning motor skills, if the child doesn't have the postural stability to do that skill, it's really hard for them to brain themselves into it. So you've got to understand both perspectives in order to get to your goal, right? By doing games and exercises that improve postural stability, you can then teach them the co-op approach so that they can figure out how to do the activity they need to do, like bike riding, for example. Right?
Is there a day that we're gonna go through like vestibular interventions, that type of thing? Because I feel like when I think about it, like conceptually, it's the one that I can think of like a lot of activities that involve vestibular. When I try to think about, okay, in a session, I have an hour with a kid. What can I possibly do in an hour that will help in the long run?
Perfect. So
like recommendations for at home and like, things like I can think of.
Oh no, internet problems. Is it me this time? Is everybody frozen? Oh no, I think I froze this time. Is everybody coming back?
In the 15 minutes, what's the threshold?
It froze. Sorry, you're back now. That was definitely me this time. Sorry. So I heard you at 15 minutes.
Yeah. So I know that you do, like you spoke about last time about doing 15 minutes activities. So how do you integrate in 15 minutes an activity that has enough of like a threshold time to have an impact?
So definitely don't hold yourself at 15 minutes, right? Like I usually say 5 activities, with the 5th one being your free choice, right? Which is often therapeutic anyway.
10.
Well, but it doesn't even have to be. Like some activities last for 20 minutes, but then another one could be 5. And that's okay, right? So maybe you're going to do a 20-minute activity that's a bit harder and you only need 5 minutes to regulate in between, right? Because you're going to know that kid. And so I think what we can do next week, what we can kind of talk about is different activities that are very typical, like base activities that we often do at the beginning when we start working with a kid, and what they affect, what they impact. Uh-oh, it's awake. Hear it.
It's awake.
It's like a timer, guys. It's amazing. You can't hear that? Daniel stopped walking for like 1 second. So next week, what I'll do is I have some videos. When the pandemic started, I went to the clinic with my stepdaughter and my husband, and we made a bunch of videos of the activities and exercises so we could use it for telehealth. So I can share my screen and show you all of these cool videos of basic exercises, right? So what you're going to do when you start learning vestibular exercises, proprioceptive, that kind of stuff, we'll start with the basic exercises. there's hundreds and thousands of games that you can play, right? I'm wrapping up and then I'll feed him. Huh? He hasn't gone to bed yet? Okay, I'm going to feed him and then he's going to go to bed. Sorry. Parenting moment. But start with the basics, and everybody starts with the same, scooter board activities, the simple movements that we can do in different environments, and then we tie in swings, and then we work our way. So I'll cover some of the easiest ones that have the biggest bang for their buck kind of thing. And then, but that's what it is. Like it's the ones that really get you going. And then we can analyze why they do. So I think that's what we'll do next time. Does that sound like a good plan to you guys? Like we'll see videos, we'll talk about it, and we'll say, okay, it affects this sensory system in this one, and I would do it for these reasons.
Yeah.
I think that would be the most functional use of it. So you have the base, and we didn't have to really talk about every single system because you can kind of see what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And that I sent you guys all the handout on sensory integration. The French one is the best one, ironically. But if you read through that, it really explains it nicely. And I share that with parents all the time because it's way more efficient than me writing it all out in a report. We don't write this kind of stuff in the report. I give them a handout. The report is, their kid. It's a breakdown of them, not a theory.
I've had less questions after sending Eva the reports home when I attach that document.
Right. So everybody, this is Alexia. Sorry, not everyone.
Yeah, sorry. I'll turn my screen on. Sorry.
Oh, hold on. I have to go stop share. Hold on, so you can see everybody. Hello, there you are.
Okay. Hi everyone. Hi, I'm Alexia.
Alexia is one of our
Nice to meet you.
And so she's joining in to cover some of the stuff if there's anything I've missed in her training and learning. And so any questions that you guys have, right? Like either Alexia might have a different way of explaining it that made more sense to her, which is really good. But also you guys will do some evals with Alexia. So it's good for you guys to know her as well.
Awesome.
How's that for today? Pretty good? Like good wrap up, good theory. Yeah. All right. So then we'll stop our meeting for today. And what we'll do is next week, I'll send you guys some more videos to watch. I just have to think like which ones I want to send you that makes sense with what I'm going to cover next week. And then we'll go from there. And same thing, you can email me any questions that you have because I'll cover them next week as well.
Were you able to send that recording to like the last one to someone?
I was.
Could we do it with this one as well?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
And if I forget, remind me.
Perfect.
I do well with those reminders. All right. Thanks, everybody. Alexia, stay on. We have that
Thanks,
okay.
Me? Yeah, okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye. This.